All right. I am just going to wait to get the go ahead from our producer, Emily, and then we will get started with what is going to hopefully be, well, not hopefully, what absolutely is going to be a fantastic live stream with fantastic guests. Let's see. Emily, are we good to go? Okay, we're good to go. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to Dispatches Live on Breakthrough News. I am your host, Rania Khalek. War between Iran, Israel, and the United States continues to escalate into a second week. The region is on fire, literally, and no one appears to be backing down. The question now is how much further this war will expand, who's actually winning on the battlefield, and how sustainable this war is for the U.S. and Israel. Because while the war drums are beating ever louder in Washington, the reality inside the U.S. looks very different. Polls show overwhelming public opposition to a war with Iran, and there are growing reports of resistance among American soldiers themselves, as Trump appears increasingly willing to put U.S. boots on the ground. So, what's really happening in this war, militarily, politically, and inside the U.S. military? To discuss all of this, I'm going to be speaking to two guests. First, to break down the military tactics and weapons shaping the U.S.-Israel-Iran war is Jon Elmer, a contributing editor at the Electronic Intifada. And after speaking with Jon, I'll be joined by Mike Prysner, executive director of the Center on Conscience and War and filmmaker at Empire Files, to talk about widespread opposition to war on Iran among American soldiers and what it reveals about morale, public opinion, and the limits of U.S. war-making power. But first, I want to remind everybody who's watching that we are an independent media outlet here at Breakthrough News. So first off, make sure that you like this episode, share it with everybody you can, and make sure you comment and engage. All of that helps boost us in the algorithm. And also, if you want to really support Breakthrough News, you can become a member by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And with all that said, I am going to go ahead and bring in the lovely Jon Elmer. Jon, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Rania. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to see you too, though it's always because we got to talk about war.
Yes.
But you are such a fantastic military analyst, and that's what I want to talk to you about. There's so many different fronts taking place here. There's so many different angles to it. So, Jon, before we get into maybe specific weapon systems and who's using what, can you maybe talk a little bit about the defense architecture across the region right now?
Sure. I mean, this is a generational thing. The US security architecture, I mean, I think we think of it as like a natural right or something. But this was all a product of the first original Gulf War in the 1990s. And then, of course, escalated significantly in the global war on terror. So the base apparatus throughout the Middle East is not a divine right. It's not natural law that these should exist. They exist for an imperialist war in Afghanistan, essentially, because they, to move assets into place in Afghanistan, they needed those bases to kind of hop from. And they've sort of spun that to the host nations as creating a security architecture for them that would keep them safe. And what we've seen, of course, in the last, I guess we're on day 10 now, is about the exact opposite of that. It's put states that don't have anything to do with it into the line of fire and forces them to take a position that probably goes against the vast majority of their populations. These bases in most countries are very unpopular. You can even see on our show last week, I brought a bunch of video evidence, and it was very difficult to find a strike in one of these host Gulf countries where the people on the ground are not cheering. Everybody in every video, there's cheering on the ground. I think that there's a lot of people that don't want those bases and don't see the benefit of those bases in their communities. And that's, I think, the Iranian strategy, is to put that kind of security architecture really in the crosshairs. And if they're going to be pushed into an existential war, which I think this truly is for Iran. If you believe everything, even if you don't believe what Trump says, but look at what they're doing, it's an existential war. And so I think a long-term strategy of Iran was going to be to target those bases. And I think that they have done that in a pretty spectacular way over the last 10 days.
It's really incredible when you think about the fact that these Gulf states that are being hit by Iran right now, well, they're, the US bases on them that are being hit by Iran, a lot of the injuries we're seeing, or not even injuries, a lot of the damage we're seeing from shrapnel is coming from the interceptors that are being used to shoot down Iranian missiles to protect the US bases, and then falling on, all of this civilian infrastructure across places like Dubai, across Kuwait, across Saudi Arabia, across Bahrain. It's just completely wild that. And I mean, if I was a country, I would start to see, if I was one of these countries, I would start to see these US bases as not assets to protect me, but as actually a liability, because it's destroying their economies as we speak. But we'll see. We'll see if they eventually kind of get that message or how that plays out. But I do want to ask you, I want to kind of go through each of the countries that are fighting right now and what they've got on their side. So I want to start with the Israelis, who are the most protected from all these defense systems of really anybody else. But let's first talk about, what can you describe to our audience, what offensive weapons and capabilities are the Israelis relying on in this war, especially as they're, effectively fighting on multiple fronts. And at some point later on, we will get to the Lebanon front here. So I want to ask you about Israel's offensive capabilities. And then I want to ask you about their defensive capabilities, because that's what they're relying heavily on, the various interceptor systems that they have in their own country with the 5 layers, but as well as the interceptors beyond their country that actually stop Iranian missiles before they even get into Israeli airspace.
Right. So offensively, I mean, they've been on an unprecedented offensive, upwards of 10,000 bombs that they've dropped in 10 days. They're doing that with American fighter jets that are, that are purchased with money given to them by the United States. The addition of the F-35 has stretched their ability to strike Iran, which wasn't something that they had previously. So those are an introduction to the conflict that allows Israel to do something that, in previous decades of Netanyahu wanting to do it, it wasn't possible to do without the U.S. Now we have this situation where the Israelis can say, well, we're going, right? And that Trump made that sort of excuse, saying like the Israelis were going, so we figured we had to join them, because they were going to do it on their own. So that is something that's different. If we were talking 10 years ago, I don't think we would be having this same conversation, because they've never had the ability to do that. What we've seen over the first 10 days, a lot of Israeli strikes have been from outside of Iran. They use standoff weapons, essentially air cruise missiles that are carried by air, and they're launched from the borders of Iran. So that's what we saw for the first 10 days. They're attempting to degrade the air defenses in Iran so that they can have what they call air superiority over Iran, which would allow them to freely bomb, more hospitals than the 29 hospitals that they've already bombed. In terms of defensive, they are part of this massive U.S. project for missile defense that is a product of the Cold War, that is essentially a system of shooting missiles out of the air with missiles. It's an incredibly complex, extraordinarily expensive, very technical process to do that, because even when they're training, when U.S. troops are training, and they know where the missile is going to go, they know when it's being fired. There's a countdown to when that missile is being fired because it's a training operation. It's still difficult to hit the missiles. So this is with everything ideal conditions. And those ideal conditions are no longer in place because the Iranian strategy has been to knock out the radar systems on these U.S. bases that provide that interlocking missile defense capabilities, which is why you have seen the USS Ford, the aircraft carrier strike group that is off the coast of Israel. They're effectively only able to protect Israel because they have to be so far off of the coast, because Hezbollah has anti-ship weaponry. They have to stay so far off coast that they're not actually providing a security umbrella for the Gulf states that are being targeted. They're just doing it for Israel. And there's a number of times we will encounter this throughout this discussion where it's really, this is for Israel. There's nothing in this for the U.S. In fact, there's just a lot to lose for the U.S., and it's probably starting to happen right now at the gas stations across the United States. I haven't gone out today to see what it's like in Canada, but we're obviously expecting significant energy spikes. So the ability to have this missile defense function properly relies on these high, $500 million radar systems. And once those radar systems are knocked out in certain places, you lose the overlapping nature of the missile defense, and that's what the whole system is built on. It can't just be one system, one missile. They have this whole apparatus of missiles and systems. So when you knock out these radars, you're leaving blind spots, and you're relying on a radar that's now further away to detect the launch. And detecting the launch is the asset that these systems make. They have early detection. So you have the maximum amount of time both to see when the missile is being launched, but where it's being launched from. That allows you to calibrate the trajectory of the missile and allows you to intercept it. You start pulling these radars offline, and we don't know yet because we have never seen this system have radars be knocked out. We're living things that we don't have the ability to go back in history and say, well, this happened at that time. But the strong supposition is that these radars are not going to be replaceable anytime soon. And if they are replaced, it's going to be the U.S. going to other countries that they have security arrangements with, right? Like South Korea, they just did it. And they went and they just take their air defense system and they plop it into the Middle East, leaving other countries who are supposedly U.S. allies like South Korea, or even countries like Japan, who look at this situation where they get 95% of their energy from that 100-kilometer waterway that is currently the Strait of Hormuz closed, effectively closed. And so, yeah, you have this sort of situation where under ideal circumstances, it still would be a very difficult war for the U.S. and Israel. But on these circumstances where you're losing entire parts of this missile defense system, I think we're going to see a lot more missiles hitting their targets. And that's what Iran's plan was. Iran's offensive plan was to fire a lot of their older missiles to deplete finite stocks of missile defense interceptors, and then to save their better missiles, their more potent missiles, their more accurate missiles for the time of shortage for the U.S. and Israel, which, you have various estimates because we don't know exactly how many interceptors we can watch on video. And we've seen, particularly in the Gulf states, that they're firing at 5, 6, 7 interceptors at a single missile. That math is not going to work out for the Gulf states. There was the previous supposition that maybe if you fired 2 Patriot interceptors, these are multi-million-dollar interceptors that they only build 600 of in a year. That's the Patriot system that most of the Gulf uses. But when you get up to the higher systems, it's even less interceptors, like the THAAD system, which is their most sophisticated system. They produced less than 100 interceptors last year. So
Wow.
you start to think about a ballistic missile stockpile in Iran in the thousands, and you can just see that this is not something that can go on for a long time for Israel and the U.S. And I think that's Iran's war plan.
And then I just wanted to ask you before we kind of move on to the US, and then I want to talk about Iran more. We're seeing all of this interceptor debris causing damage in the Gulf states. So I started to get, I'm in my mind, I'm just thinking, shouldn't we be seeing something similar taking place inside Israel, since Israel has all these interceptor systems that essentially should be shooting out missiles as well and then causing debris? No.
Yeah, they just had it the other day. They had an attack helicopter. They do a lot of the drone intercepts with helicopters and fighter jets. Also, a crazy financial disparity to be flying these planes around for $20,000 drones. But the Israeli military released on their channel, the IDF channel, they released a helicopter coming up behind one of the Shahed drones and firing their 30 millimeter cannon, which sends out these like pop bottle size rounds and hits the back of the drone. And then, 3 hours later, you're reading that people are upset in Israel because the drone came down on their house. And that's happening in Jordan, particularly, because the Israelis are using Jordanian territory to intercept drones before they get into Israeli territory. In terms of so the lower level of the air defense system is the Iron Dome, which is the one that people are most familiar with because of the years of using it in Gaza, really, but also on the Lebanon front. They try to intercept them. The intention is to intercept them over open space, and that's the intention. But of course, we've seen them fall all over. We see them fall all over Jordan. We saw, the Saudi oil field was hit by pieces of an interception that set off the Ras Tanura fire in their oil installation was from an interception. So, these can cause real problems. And the people in Jordan just watching this, 75% Palestinians, like they're watching their country be used essentially as a human shield for this war. And I think that these are the kind of things in the long run that just can't, that seem like that just the center can't hold on these kind of things when these states are being shown so bare to have no benefit from this security arrangement, and actually are now being drawn into a war where their most fundamental ways of living, like desalination plants, you pop the desalination plants in the Gulf countries and life ends there within weeks. These are not these are fragile systems that and for Israel yesterday to target Tehran's oil depots and create
like nuclear winter level black cloud that was raining oil.
Yeah, that rain, like nuclear winter with oil rain. It's just horrifying. And I guess they're just counting on the decency of the Iranians not to knock out the drinking water as a response to this kind of warfare, to expand the warfare in that way. That just looked like a desperation.
It's disgusting. Listen, Jon, I want to show, this might be a simplistic video, but I feel like it's a good visual and everything you've described. And then I want to ask you a couple more questions. You may have seen this. It's been making the rounds on like Instagram and on YouTube. And I just think it's like, for those of us who like don't understand the nitty gritty, it does a really good job of just showing you how missiles on their way to Israel get stopped on the way with all of these different interceptor systems.
There's 10 missiles at Israel, and even one of those missiles successfully hits its target, it would be considered a major success for Iran, because targeting Israel from Iran is extremely difficult. As soon as Iran launches missiles, they are first targeted by American Patriot defense systems deployed in Iraq, where the United States has military bases. The missiles that survive this phase then enter the airspace of Syria and Jordan. By that time, Israeli Air Force fighter jets are already mobilized, and they enter Syrian airspace to try to intercept and shoot down the missiles. We know that Jordan is also assisting Israel, and Jordan itself attempts to intercept the missiles to prevent them from reaching Israel. Despite all this, the missiles that get close to Israel's borders are then targeted by American naval warships deployed in the Mediterranean Sea. Any missiles that still manage to enter Israel must then face Israel's 5-layered defense system, which includes Arrow missile system, THAAD system, Patriot system, David Sling, Iron Dome. Remarkably, despite all these defensive measures, some Iranian missiles still manage to evade the defense systems and ultimately strike cities such as Tel Aviv and Haifa.
So I think that's like a really good, just kind of very basic overview. And for it's just a good visual representation. And it's just wild because I'm sitting here talking to you from Lebanon, where we have zero air defenses, just completely nakedly open to whatever Israel fires here. And same with Syria, same with Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel has so many layers of protection. But then, you know, interceptors, you were talking about the fact that there's only so many, right? And maybe they're meant to be used for a brief period of time, but not for a sustained period of time. You can't make them as fast as you're using them in this scenario. So think about, I just want to kind of ask you, and this kind of maybe moves into more of the realm of like the US and Israel together, but you know, we've got the US deploying, I think, another aircraft carrier to the region, which will give them 3 aircraft carriers. You've got extensive US bases. You've got all these interceptor systems across the Gulf, and then across these states, the Iraqis, the Jordanians, before it gets to all of these Israeli interceptors. And at the same time, we're hearing about these US shortages of interceptors and even munitions, by the way. With the Pentagon, and you mentioned this, is relocating certain systems from other parts of the world, like South Korea, for example, and moving them. I don't know if it was the Patriots or the THAADs, or I don't know all the lingo like you do. Well, all that's to say, how sustainable is all this? I know that there was, Lockheed Martin had said that they would quadruple munitions production. And maybe munitions are easier to make than interceptors, but like, how sustainable is something like this if it goes on for, we're hearing, 100 days maybe?
I mean, we could even talk about 5 days, because the ships that are the cruise missile, the destroyers, the missile destroyers that are with the USS Ford, they can't be resupplied at sea. So they carry a finite number of interceptors. And when those interceptors are done, those multi-million-dollar interceptors that can range from $3 to $25 million per, when they fire those, they have to then reload onshore. They have to sail down to Diego Garcia. They have to go through what would look like offloading of a ship at any port. Wouldn't surprise people, dozens, if not hundreds of people involved in reloading them, and then send them back for the 2.5 day sail back to the region. So these systems are super finite. And the way that, because, I think I already maybe said it, but because of the threat onshore, the carrier strike group, the USS Ford, is so far off of the coast that their radars don't work for much of the Gulf, much of the Gulf states. So they are really and truly this multi-billion-dollar, what their daily costs are, I don't know. Sometimes I lose track of, because the numbers get so big, you can't even really, how many billions before your brain can really comprehend how much it is. But they're spending this incredible amount of money to battle against $1 million missile, a $25,000 to $50,000 drone. Like the drones that they're firing, the Iranians have fired 2,600 of them. The easiest way to understand them is they're essentially the size of a car, the speed of a car, and the cost of a car. And they're out there competing against all of these, billion-dollar apparatuses. The missile defense program, I mean, you can't even really put a price on it, because it started through the Cold War, through the Star Wars era, and then it came, through to the Israelis as seeing it as something that the Israelis really needed. And the Americans kind of worked on it with them because they saw the benefit to them as well. But these projects are largely, they're for Israel. And they're billions of dollars, and missiles are absolutely making it through to Israel. And the fact that the media, I'm sure your audience isn't part of that, but anyone who watches the regular media, you'd think that Israel stops everything. They have all these beautiful systems and science, and it's amazing. It's simply not true. It wasn't true with the Iron Dome. And it's not true with the higher end as well. And then Iran has missile capabilities with movable re-entry vehicles that can essentially change their target in flight, which effectively amounts to steering, in simple terms. And so really it's the longer this goes on, the more difficult it is to see how the Americans get out of it. And that's the sort of, I think, the worrying part when you have such a random, you know, psycho like Trump that at any given moment could tip World War III. I don't see what his off ramp is other than to do his Trumpian thing where he's like, "Oh, we won. It was the greatest."
I mean,
thing
let
ever.
him. Yeah, let him say it if it makes it stop. I guess. I just
but
really
the
quickly
Iranians will chase him out with missiles. That. So that'll be. Yeah.
I want to talk about Iran specifically and those $10,000 like drones that you're talking about. It's kind of incredible that those are taking down these multi-billion-dollar systems. But first, I have to lecture the audience because I see that we have over 1,000 viewers, but I only see 260 likes. I don't like that math, you guys. I'm gonna need anybody who has not hit the like button to go ahead and smash it now. Smash that like button. Helps boost us in the algorithm. So yeah, and also you guys, I'm talking to you from Lebanon. I should get extra likes for that. Yeah. Extra likes for talking to you from Lebanon. But yes, hit the like button, please, everyone. Okay, so Jon, on the Iranian side of things, I want you to break down, we see that Iran is relying heavily on drones. They've got ballistic missiles. I think I saw that drones were even being launched from mobile launchers to make it more difficult. Like, I don't know if that means guys on scooters, but to make it more difficult for the Israelis to hit the launch sites. But tell us about Iran's offensive weaponry here.
Yeah, no, those drones could be launched off of racks, that look like maybe like donut racks with an angle on them, and you can then put a dozen. You can have it double and have 24, and you can just fire them off all at once from the same place. That's a little bit risky just because it takes time and gives a radar signature that could be struck back on. But they can fire those drones. I mean, we've seen in the war in Ukraine that there's nothing that you can do to stop drones. In the Ukraine, the way that they're stopping the same drones that are being used here, they're Iranian Shahed drones. They're putting up like fishing nets to, miles wide fishing nets to try to catch them. That's where we're at wow. Basically like forest survival techniques are the front line technique to deal with these drones. They run on Chinese or Russian GPS, and they're extremely precise that you can plug in the coordinate of the third floor building in the Bahrain hotel where U.S. troops moved when they moved off the base to protect them. They put them in hotels basically right beside the bases. And you can put those kind of coordinates in and hit them directly. You could put the coordinate in to hit the exact radar that matters for knocking out the system, rather than sending a ballistic missile in and hoping the shrapnel knocks out the system. So these drones are highly effective and pinpoint accurate. They also are largely fiberglass. They fly low and slow, so their radar signature is limited. They have a hard time finding them. And then when they do find them, they attempt to shoot them out of the air with Patriot interceptors that are multi-million dollars. Or they have to have piloted aircraft up in the air, essentially doing patrols. And you'll see that in Jordan. They're running up and down the border, just waiting for the drones. And then when they see them, the drones are going slow. They're going faster than you would drive, but not faster than your car goes. And so they're able in a fighter jet or an attack helicopter to really, ideally shoot them down in a place over the desert. But we see in Jordan all the time them landing on people's houses. So the drones are significant. Iran's last military update, they said 2,600 drones had been fired. So that's a significant part of this war for sure, and it will be the enduring part of the war, because even if were you to think that the Americans could be successful in this war, once you destroyed the country, there would still be the capacity in a guerrilla movement to constantly launch these drones, because you can just launch them out of your hands at some points, right? You don't need massive architecture infrastructure to launch these drones. So, and the Iranians have, I think, untold thousands of these drones. They're not going to start this existential war that they have known has been coming for years and not be fully prepared for that. So drones, I don't think there is any solution to the drone problem. And then from there, they move up to missiles that they have been building that go back to the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, when they spent the entire 1980s fighting missile wars with the U.S. backed Iraqis, where they would fire missiles into each other's communities constantly. Ultimately, at one point, the U.S. gave Saddam chemical weapons so that the missiles could have chemical weapons that were lobbed into Iran. So missiles have been a key part of this entire lifespan of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And so they have been developing them and are a world power in missile development, in numbers, in types, in different capacities. We're seeing right now cluster munitions being used. So even if your Interceptor is successful, it breaks apart into, some of them break apart into 10, 12, 15 separate warheads, and some of them are 80.
Wow.
80 different you've probably seen the videos of them when they come
Yeah.
out. That's the first time we've seen them. We've known that they've had them, and Ansar Allah, the Yemeni armed forces, have used them on their Palestine 2 ballistic missile to some degree too. And that just means that now you're talking 20 Interceptor missiles. And that's if you get them, right? If you use the 2-for-1 that they use with the Patriot system, now you're talking about 100 interceptors for a single missile. So it's really, the missile capacity they have is significant. It can travel distances that make every area within Israel in play. They're accurate to a reasonable degree that allows them to land them on the military bases that they're aiming for. We know that from the 12-day war. The Israelis, of course, cover this stuff up really well. They're able to censor stuff in the neighborhood. So obviously they're able to completely censor things that happen on a desert military base, which is where these bases are. But you can see from Hezbollah's field reports and from the Iranian field reports that they're both firing on Israeli military bases. And after the 12-day war, it was revealed that a lot more hits on those bases happened than were suggested at the time of the war. And we can pretty much guarantee that will happen again this time. So that really does make up their offensive. They're not looking to fight a ground war. They don't really have a navy. This Trump going in on we've destroyed the Iranian navy is
Right.
yeah, like after they said they destroyed the Iranian Air Force, which was like the Shah era Air Force, that sanctions didn't allow any parts to fix. So these are not serious gains, but they indicate that the Americans don't have a lot to show for this. They're trying to tell you they sunk a bunch of ships that were tied up at shore. And that is, showing that we're going to win this war, America. And it just doesn't, the longer this war goes, it does not go in the U.S. favor. And the other thing that the Iranians have is they have a really significant cruise missile capability, and those can carry heavier warheads. They can be.
Have they used cruise missiles?
They've used a few.
Yeah.
They haven't used as many as I thought they would. In True Promise 1 and True Promise 2, the first two operations after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, and the second True Promise, they used quite a number of cruise missiles, and cruise missiles go faster so the drones go low and slow. Cruise missiles go a bit higher and a bit faster, and then you have the missiles. You put those three together and you make these complex attacks where you have things coming in at different speeds, different payloads, and it really shakes up the missile defense systems. And we saw that in in Yemen on the Red Sea, where the Americans were trying to fight these battles, and they said that their shooting down of cruise missiles, drones, and ballistic missiles and anti-ship missiles was the most naval warfare that the U.S. had done since the Second World War. And that was against the Yemenis and Ansar Allah, who have shared technology with the Iranians, but they don't have the nation state that Iran has, the industrial base, the size of the country. And you start talking about a generation of doing this where the entire military strategy interspersed with the human ingenuity of the people of Iran have created a significant missile system that, the way that the Israelis are trying to stop it is to knock out the launchers.
Right.
But there's more launchers than the ones that they see above ground. There's underground launches. They have really sophisticated silos that launch from under the ground that you can't see. So I don't think that they're going to be able to curtail Iranian missile attacks in the time frame necessary for the U.S. to be effective in stopping them.
Yeah, it's really about like who can last longer. And Iran's got these like homemade drones that operate so well. The Russians were buying them to use in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Russia's got a very sophisticated military itself. So and of course I have seen that the US and the Israelis are saying the Iranians are firing 90% less than they were in the beginning of the war. And they're saying that's evidence that Iran's retaliatory capacity has been severely degraded. What do you think that's actually about? Or is that accurate?
I just think they lie and they lie. I mean, it's, if you go back, and this has now been a 3-year war when you really think about it, going back to October 7th, when you think about the number of lies that Israel has told in that period of time, compared to their truths. I don't see that. I don't think if the number is that it's declined by 80%, but that could be a choice of Iran to stretch the war out. And that is, that's what I would do. I mean, I think that that's their number one, tool to survive, and not just to survive, but to put an end to this Trump 2-week war. Israel attacks whenever there's elections, or, Netanyahu's not, worried about his next election, so they attack Iran. That can't be. This can't go on the way that it is. Israel marauding through the Middle East, taking over whole chunks of countries, if not entire countries themselves. It has to be stopped, and I think Iran sees it as existential, and I think Hezbollah does as well.
Well, so I'm glad you mentioned Hezbollah, because I want to make sure I get to ask you about that before we wrap this part of the stream up, because we are going to get to another guest. But Jon, you're just like such an encyclopedia when it comes to the military analysis of all of this, and it's so important to understand. So exactly a week ago now, Hezbollah, which is a group that exists in Lebanon, where I am speaking to you from, entered this war by launching missiles at Israel. And Israel has, of course, unleashed on Lebanon, but that's not the full story. I'm sure that's what's making the news, is that the Israelis are mass bombarding southern Lebanon. There's about 500,000 displaced people because they've issued these like these displacement orders, or these like stay and die or leave like sort of threats.
Yeah.
And that's what's been really making headlines. But there are ongoing battles taking place in the south of Lebanon as the Israelis prepare to try to invade. And the Hezbollah was severely weakened in 2024. There's no doubt about that. They lost their senior leadership. They've now rebuilt to some degree, and they are demonstrating that they still have the capacity to fire missiles at the Israelis. They've been making a lot of their own weapons. The Israelis are particularly having a difficult time with Hezbollah's drones. So can you tell us, how does Hezbollah's entrance into this war impact the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran? Or does it at all, really? I would think it would, because it does, siphon away a little bit of resources from the Israelis on the one hand. And then also, what are Hezbollah's capabilities here? What are you looking at, and what do you expect to see moving forward?
Yeah, I think that Israel's genocidal disposition of creating ethnic cleansing everywhere they go is devastating, and I think that it's unfortunate. I know Hezbollah. I was in Lebanon in the 2006 war, and the way that they got people out, moved people out of the battle space, was something that garnered them a lot of credibility and respect in 2006. And when people came home, they came home right away. And they would, when I was there, they would yell off the balcony, like, I was home at 11 a.m. on the day of the ceasefire, right? Like, you can't keep me out of my house for more than 2 hours after the official ceasefire. But this war came on fast, and it came on too fast for the Americans. They're not fully ready to fight this war. Trump seemed to come up with this timeline out of thin air, like he always does, and it's difficult for Hezbollah to be proactive in the way that they were in 2006, and I think that that's really unfortunate. And devastating, the ethnic cleansing, just driving people from their homes where they don't have places to go. There's no infrastructure yet set up, although I hope that in the coming days that there will be more of that infrastructure set up. But for Hezbollah to join the war, a lot of people thought that, we were told that Hezbollah was, defeated in the last war, but that's not how the last war went. Israel attempted a massive ground invasion of South Lebanon and the ending stages of that war, and they were repelled by Hezbollah ground forces. Israel was unable to move forward to the Litani like they intended to do with their force at that time. I think it was mounting up around 100,000 troops that they had, and Hezbollah held them back. And then there was a ceasefire, and the ceasefire was, I think, in large part, was to stop the war on the people of Lebanon who had, endured this war. And I think, to keep the social fabric of the state it needed to be defended of its sovereignty, but then ultimately needed to be kept in place. And I think that Hezbollah made a decision to stop the war and give a ceasefire an opportunity. But the ceasefire has been a complete fraud. I'm sure you've talked about it on your show before. The number of violations are absurd, in the tens of thousands. They killed 500 plus Hezbollah cadre leaders. They're just assassinating them on their bikes, on their motorbikes going to get groceries. And that could not continue. You cannot use a ceasefire to eradicate, to destroy a militant group. That group can't allow that to happen. And so I think that the fact that they are able to join the war, and to join the war at full pace, not not dribs and drabs. I mean, they came in. I've been keeping track of this because it's just so remarkable. There are 115 operations in as of yesterday, in 6 days. So they're 20 operations a day. Some days there's as many as 33 operations. And they have a huge advantage because of proximity. They have the advantage of proximity to Israel that Iran has the advantage of proximity to the Gulf states. They could use a much more wide array of weaponry because the distance is shorter. They can use different teams to fire off different ordinances because the distance is so short. You don't need highly complex launch systems. And then the distance that the rockets, and they have missiles, they have anti-ship missiles too, which is why the USS Gerald Ford is offshore. These get to Israel really quickly. And so the air defense system really struggles, especially with complex attacks. And the drones, they just don't have any solution. The Israelis have no solution for the drones. There was a clip that Hezbollah put out yesterday, and the Israeli soldiers are on the ground shooting up like they're spraying in the air, hoping that they hit the drone. And if they do hit the drone, it drops it into their neighbor's courtyard or whatever. I mean, that that image alone it shows you what they have for those drones, because the drones can fly low and slow, low radar signature. The Yemenis used all kinds of tricks to make it look like that wasn't a drone. They came out over the Mediterranean, because the drones can go 2,500 kilometers. They can go far more distance than is needed. That is the case for Iran, and for Hezbollah and for the Yemenis, who haven't joined the war. But should the Yemenis join the war and close off the Red Sea and the Suez, now you're talking about 80+% of global trade. So the Yemenis have stayed out of the war at this point, but they're there with with an ace card to play at any point. But to the Hezbollah, the drones are able to penetrate very easily. They have significant rocket capacity, multiple launch rocket systems that really tie up the Iron Dome. I mean, Hezbollah has 20 rocket launchers that they can fire, and that keeps the Iron Dome really at its peak to try to be successful, and it just can't stay that way. So a lot gets through, and I think that is the goal for Hezbollah, because Hezbollah, like Iran, are in an existential battle here, and they joined the war, and I can see how that could have created some issues in Lebanon, that it was them that joined the war. But within days, the war was coming to Hezbollah. So you might be able to quibble with whether they should have been the one to do it or be seen in Lebanon as defending. I think is immaterial in the outcome. The outcome is that the war was coming for Hezbollah, and it was going to be either during the Iran war or it was going to be after the Iran war. And there's nothing that Netanyahu has done that suggests that he's going to stop this genocidal rampage. He's reshaping the Middle East. He sees it as a messianic endeavor, and Hezbollah would be foolish to believe that they were going to be not involved in this war. So when their largest backer, they're in some ways their creator, their patron, is being attacked in this way, they simply couldn't stay on the sideline. And I think that joining the war gives the opportunity to be part of the solution to this war, which in the hope would be, which would constrain Israel to stop attacking its neighbors every few months and massacring tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in these places, while the whole world just sits back and says, well, it's a dangerous region, or whatever excuse people in America and Europe are giving to allow Israel to do this.
And Jon, lastly, I just wanted to briefly ask you, because I know we do have to, we're going to get to our next guest after this, who's got a lot to say on what I'm going to ask you about as well. We do hear Donald Trump increasingly favoring the idea of putting U.S. troops on the ground. Let's say something like that were to happen, that I think would change this war into something dramatically different that would not go in the direction the U.S. thinks it would. But what would you, as a military analyst, see happening if that were to take place, if we were to put American troops on the ground?
I just don't even think it's possible. Michael know better, but I don't think that if the United States depended on it, that they could build up a ground invasion, like a Desert Storm style invasion of Iran. Iran is a mountainous country. It's basically surrounded by mountains. Mm-hmm. It's like the challenge of Israelis fighting uphill in Lebanon times 10. And it's also massive. I don't see it. There isn't a ground war solution to this. I can't imagine. I don't know how the Pentagon and intelligence officials allowed Trump to get into this war in the first place, but I
Right.
don't think that they're going to allow him to spiral this into a war that, could destroy large portions of the American military. I don't think there's that support, but I would respectfully defer to Mike on that. He'll know better what people think about, even if American soldiers would be down with that kind of operation.
Yeah. Well, Jon Elmer, contributing editor at the Electronic Intifada, where you do like basically a weekly update of the military movements that are taking place across the region. Everybody should check that out on Thursdays, I believe.
Every Thursday.
Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, Rania.
So that was the wonderful Jon Elmer, and very important conversation about what's going on in the battlefield on all these different fronts. And so next I have, to continue the conversation, Executive Director of the Center on Conscience and War and filmmaker at the Empire Files, the wonderful Mike Prysner. Mike, it's good to see you.
Rania, hello.
Welcome back to the show. There's lots to talk about. I mean, geez, the world has just exploded in the last 10 days. And so I want to start with, you are working at this organization, the Center on Conscience and War, and your organization is actively encouraging U.S. service members to basically seek legal discharge if they don't want to participate in a ground war against Iran, which is being floated as a real possibility right now. So why don't we start off by, can you explain what your organization does and what this campaign is about?
Yeah, well, interestingly, the day I started this job was the day that 6 Americans were killed in Kuwait. Then a couple days later, the massacre at the girls' school in Iran. So it was an unintended start to this new position, heading up the Center on Conscience and War. But it's a start, nonetheless, of me coming into this position. This organization's been around for 85 years, more than 85 years. And since World War I has been helping conscientious objectors get out of the military. Of course, there's a number of amazing counselors that are experts on that. People have done this for over 40 years, a network of attorneys. I mean, it's a really great, free, anonymous organization where you can get help if you're a member of the military, whether you think you're a CO, whether you've gone AWOL and need help, or the variety of other ways that you can get out of the military. I mean, our basic core mission is that we don't believe that anyone should have to do anything that violates their conscience in the military. And there's a variety of ways that you can exercise that right. And so what we've been doing recently in regards to the Iran war is the same thing that's been done for decades and decades. But we have found that, of course, at times like this, a lot more people are thinking about that. They're thinking about their own conscience, their own morals. They're having kind of deep explorations of themselves and what they're willing to do. And I think when you're looking at, the day-to-day news, there's a lot of people having those questions. And so we have been really trying to be diligent and putting out to the public that, because most people don't know these resources exist, right? I mean, when I was getting ready to go to the Iraq war, I had questions. I was looking for answers. I was looking possibly for support. I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, but I didn't find any resources. I didn't find any people who were there to counsel me or give me advice or anything. And so we know that right now there are thousands of soldiers and airmen and Marines who are questioning what they're being part of, getting ready to be deployed, not wanting to be part of it, but not knowing that they have any options. And so on the one hand, our job right now is to get the word out there as much as possible that these resources do exist. There are people here who can help you, and then actually managing those cases. And we, from the very beginning of starting an application through going to the actual conscientious objector hearings with service members, we're with people every step of the way.
And I just want to put this up on screen, which is a phone number that people can contact. Why don't you, well, I'll leave that up there for now because you've said that since launching this campaign, your phones have basically been ringing off the hook with calls from soldiers and their families. So tell us what you're hearing from active duty troops right now. What kind of concerns are they expressing?
Well, we fielded hundreds of calls just in the past 7 days, or hundreds in less than 7 days for sure. A majority are people who are in the active duty military. I mean, we're talking about people who have guard units and reserve units who are being activated right now to go to the Middle East. Active duty military units who are on standby to go to the Middle East. Also people who don't have imminent deployment orders, but are very worried about them coming. We even worked with someone who thought he was going to get deployed. He filed as a conscientious objector. They tried to send him anyway. They forward deployed him to stage to go to the Middle East. We threatened to file a complaint against his command. They sent him back home, and now he's getting an honorable discharge. So even some of these things are even down to the wire. Like, people are being sent overseas and contact us to get help. I'm also hearing from a lot of families. We're getting a lot of calls from very, as you can imagine, panicked family members, spouses and parents and siblings who are trying to find ways to save their loved ones. And it's, of course, there's a lot of options we can provide people, but I would say overall, of course, there's a sector of the military that's pumped about this and is excited to have their war and has some fantasies about what it's going to be like and all of that. Of course, there's a lot of indoctrination in the military to that effect, and it's effective. But you have a lot of people who are seeing what's happening, not only thinking about what it means for themselves, like, do I want to go get blown up in a hotel room in Bahrain or something, but thinking about what it means to wear the uniform and what the U.S. is doing to the people of Iran and the world. And I think that there's you find a lot of people who have deep moral issues with that, and they're looking for support.
Fair enough. And here, I just want to show people the flyer, and I'll do like I'll show another close up of that phone number again. But basically, don't choose your orders over your conscience. It's a really, really great flyer. It's been going viral online. I think at some point your organization was taken off of X by the free speech warrior Elon Musk, but then was reinstated after people were outraged. And one thing that you were warning about when you were talking about the sort of responses you were getting from people is that there are more units being activated for deployments than the public realizes. So can you talk a bit about, because you're getting this sort of influx of phone calls. What are you hearing about troop mobilization and preparation that the public might not be aware of yet?
Well, it's really similar to the buildup for the invasion of Iraq, which, I was in the initial invasion. And so I remember the months, the couple months before that, of what it was like to be in the Army at that time. The DoD or the DOW is basically doing that right now. I mean, basically everyone's getting ready to go. And officially it's not what you're doing, so I think even up until we got on the plane to Iraq, officially we weren't being told we were going to Iraq. And so I think that there's units are being activated, like guard units, reserve units are being activated, meaning they're being called up. And, like the 82nd Airborne is put on standby. And so what's happening is some things gets out to the public, other things, people will call us to say, I'm in this or that unit. We're getting activated. We're getting ready to deploy. I'll look for it in the news, and there's no mention of it in the news. And so I can't give a number to how much that is happening, but we do know, and when we talk about the potentiality of a ground invasion, it's hard to say whether or not that will happen. But what we do know is they are preparing for that to happen. I mean, they are putting all the pieces in place to do something like that. And that's why we're getting a lot of calls. It's not just, there's, of course, the number of people who are just seeing themselves in uniform and seeing what they're seeing on the news and not being able to reconcile that with their conscience. But then there's also the very real kind of imminent danger that a lot of them feel that they're in.
And, you served at some point in Iraq. You saw what the terrain was, at least in some parts of it. You heard Jon probably talking at the end of that segment earlier about, Iran is a different story in terms that it really is surrounded by mountains. It's really you can't just walk into Iran. I don't know which country the Americans think they're going to walk into. They can't come through an aircraft carrier. You can't put if you really wanted to invade Iran properly, you need hundreds of thousands of troops, right? What are you going to have them all propel down from helicopters? It doesn't work like that. And so I'm just curious, we've already seen several U.S. soldiers that we know of. I think the number is at 8. You can correct me if I'm wrong, who've already been killed in this war. If the U.S. were to launch a ground invasion, and it's crazy we're even talking about that, but the reality is that Donald Trump is increasingly convinced that's a good idea. How much higher could those casualties get?
Well, look, I mean, the U.S. can wage a ground war by landing aircraft. I mean, we invaded Iraq through a mountainous area. Special forces cleared an airfield on the ground and then just landed a bunch of planes. So, it's not impossible that you could do invasions of those types of ways. That's what airborne units are for. They're for jump parachuting in and then making airfields so that planes can land in a country. Here's what we know about the Iraq war and how that relates to Iran now. First of all, in the Iraq war, the war went very badly, if you remember. But that is after pretty much immediately, in the very beginning of the Iraq war, overthrowing the Iraqi state, disbanding its military, and taking control of all its conventional weapons and bases. That was the very first thing that happened in the war. And then the war went on for 10 years and was very devastating for the United States. And so Iran, I imagine if there was a U.S. ground war in Iran, those three things would not happen immediately or for a long time. And so look at even just a guerrilla war against the U.S. occupation has proven to be really devastating for the U.S. in more than one country. The real danger of the ground war that I think people should recognize is, I'm not an expert at all in military tactics or strategy or anything like that. But what I do know is the lessons of the past several wars that the U.S. has engaged in, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Vietnam. And that's once you start committing ground troops, any number of ground troops, even if it's a small amount, and you don't immediately succeed, that number of troops just continues to grow. And then you have a situation where, we have troops there, they need support, they need more troops, you keep going. Then you have a series of administrations and leaders who don't want to take responsibility for a debacle, for a failed war, for a failure. And that's why you had, with the war in Afghanistan, just administration after administration, knowing that the war was a lost cause and lost, but no one wants to take responsibility for the defeat. And so they just kick it to the next administration. So the biggest danger of a ground war, outside of a huge amount of casualties for the U.S. and devastating crimes against Iranian people, is that it will just initiate a kind of a never-ending phase, a new phase of never-ending war for the United States. And I think the big thing, and a big thing that people are calling us very concerned with, and that I know that thousands of servants are concerned with, a big danger of the ground war is a tied to what's happening now, is that what do you expect the kind of actions? How do you expect this administration to prosecute the war, right? They already have just done the most egregious crimes. And so a ground war would mean that, they would, and Hegseth is open about this. I mean, they think the Iraq war was too soft. They thought it was too woke. And so soldiers who would be part of a ground war against Iran, or even just fighting from Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and all these other bases, the people that are in charge right now are monsters. They have no regard for human life. In fact, they revel in the killing. They revel in the killing. They revel in the killing of civilians. And that's the kind of thing that you're going to have to have weigh on your conscience for the rest of your life if you're a part of something like that. I mean, even just the bombing of the oil reserves in Iran, and this is the equivalent to dropping a biological chemical weapon on millions and millions of civilians. I mean, it's going to have that kind of impact, that kind of long-term health impact on everyone who's in that city. I mean, it's killing millions of people in a single strike. And no one in the service or in the broader population should expect that anything is going to get better when it comes to regard for human life in Iran. And so those are the real questions people need to be asking themselves right now, is can you take part in, not just a debacle, a stupid, pointless war for some terrible people who are at the top, but one that's just going to be absolutely devastating for people like us.
And before I ask you my next question, I do want to remind everybody to, if you haven't already, make sure you like this stream. Hit the like button, you guys. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure you comment and engage. That helps as well. There's about half the people watching have pressed the like button. So I feel like our audience can do better than that. All right, Mike. So given everything you've said, and what you're hearing, you said that it's that what you're hearing in terms of potential deployment sounds similar to the buildup to 2003. However, I want to ask you about something that sounds very different, because I think, I was not in the military in 2003. You would know this better than me, but the country was in a different space because of 9/11, the way that the Bush administration really led like a pretty good PR campaign for the war in Iraq for the year or so that preceded it, and really making it about 9/11. We're in a very different place right now. This war is so unpopular. 1 in 4 Americans think it's a good idea. The other 75% don't. And that's before the U.S. has even tried to put boots on the ground, right? And so on top of that, you have, I think, a different population. I mean, a lot of soldiers who would be deployed would be in their 20s, 30s. This particular subset of people in the U.S., I would assume this plays out in the military to some degree as well, is less interventionist, doesn't support war as quickly or as much, and just has a more progressive view of the world than people did maybe 20 years ago. So I think the country's in a different place as well. So I guess I'm curious how similar, or maybe I should ask you different, is the mood inside the military now compared to that period in the buildup to the war on Iraq?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's mainly like a Republican Party that supports the war right now. It's something like 85% of registered Republicans support what Trump is doing.
Yeah, MAGA are fans too, by the way. I want to point that out because everyone's like, MAGA's anti-war. They are not. But anyways, go ahead.
Maybe 10% of them. You bring up an important point. I mean, the buildup to the Iraq war, the U.S. government spent over a year conditioning people to think, using the trauma and fear of 9/11, which was a real mass thing that was felt among people in the United States, from a president that had a skyrocket approval rating. I mean, what was Bush's approval rating like in the 90s or something like that? It was very, very high after 9/11. But the conditioning was there is going to be another attack in the United States, and it's going to be with the weapon of mass destruction. It's going to be with a nuclear, biological, or chemical weapon launched from Iraq. That was the story. And so, of course, there was debate over it, and this weapons, all this. That was the conditioning to American people. I mean, they were even having people like duct tape their windows, like preparing for chemical and biological attacks. Like the conditioning was, I had the danger meter every day on the news of how the likelihood of another attack. I mean, there really was this extreme exploitation of fear and terror to manufacture consent for the invasion of Iraq. So they did a lot of very deliberate things that lasted a long time and launched the war when there was, a lot of support for the war. I mean, most Americans supported the war when that war started. Compare that to the conditioning for the Iran war. The real conditioning that the American people have gotten for the Iran war from Trump, from Hegseth, from Vance, from Tulsi Gabbard, they have been conditioning us and the American people about a war in Iran, but saying a war in Iran would be so stupid for anyone to do it. That's why you have to elect us, because the Democrats are so stupid and insane that they will start a war with Iran. And that's the worst thing ever. And that's why you should vote for us. So that's the conditioning that the American people have gotten, being told that this would be a really bad idea. And so all of a sudden, I mean, that's why there's like some whiplash, because all of a sudden people are like, oh, wait, I thought this was a bad idea. And then, MAGA and Republicans having to like cope and find ways to be like, well, actually, yeah, this is ending wars. Actually, this is ending a forever war. And so I think that's in a way good for the anti-war movement that they didn't do the propaganda operation that the U.S. would typically do before launching a big war, but in fact made themselves the beacon of reason with this. And we're warning against the dangers of doing something like this for a long time. And of course, I think in the military, different generation of people who are in right now. I can't speak for everyone in the military. There's definitely a lot of people in the military who are think that this is a good thing. But in my 20 years talking to people in the military who are anti-war, I've never met talked to as many people as I'm meeting now over the past several years. And so there's definitely a different level of consciousness in the military. And I think that's something that can be encouraging, because even with the Iraq war, it took time for there to build an anti-war movement among vets and among those who are in the military. And, to me, it seems like that's something possible much sooner.
And then I wanted to ask you about something you posted. It was a disturbing account from the mother of a service member who said that troops were told their mission was connected to bringing about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And this, adds more corroboration to these reports about several units being told by their commanders that this war is to bring about Armageddon. So I'm curious, from, just your own anecdotal experience speaking to people, how widespread is this kind of ideological or religious framing inside parts of the military command structure?
I mean, I never encountered it. I know that, there was definitely stories, in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars of like, commanders or chaplains giving crazy religious speeches before they go out on a mission and things like that. So it's not that it's unusual. I think what is unique about this story now is that, there's an organization that you can file, service members can file a complaint if they feel their religious rights have been infringed on, or that if they're being, made to listen to religious stuff they don't want to listen to. The fact that there was so many complaints across so many units in such a short period of time. I mean, 40 different units had commanders say this stuff, the second coming of Christ, Armageddon thing. of course, it's been long known that there's been a lot of, religious extremist officers and service members. I mean, others have reported on this. So that's not what's surprising, that there's people that think like this and say this stuff. What's surprising is that it happened so frequently in such a short period of time. That would indicate to me that there's some kind of collaboration and coordination between these people. And Pete Hegseth is one of them. I mean, he's one of these crusader, we have to kill all Muslims, like that. He's part of this religious extremist, crusader faction in the military. So I wonder if there's some kind of, secret meetings of these guys. It's like a faction. It's like a Christian nationalist faction that exists in the military. And the question is how organized they are.
Yeah, they're pretty well organized, and they've infiltrated the military to some degree. I mean, there's been a lot of really good journalism on this over the last 20 years, but it's just, to hear that is so freaking dangerous and crazy. And it just kind of reminds me of, it's a mirror of what the Israelis do as well, with like, the Palestinians are Amalek, and like, you have to like kill all their, loved ones and sheep. Just like to have soldiers being told to bring about the Armageddon against Iran, and then to have Marco Rubio be like, Iran is run by a bunch of religious fanatics. And it's like, well,
it's also like, unless these commanders have found a way to cultivate units of only other Christians of their specific denomination, because our organization, our main base is Christian pacifists and Christian communities that, have a different set of morals than these guys do. So unless they have found a way to get just a bunch of other like-minded soldiers under their command, you have to imagine, I mean, that's why there's so many complaints, because they can say this stuff. It probably makes them feel good to say it, and they feel very righteous and like they're leading some kind of holy war. But you have to imagine that in a way that helps us, in the sense that it creates some discontent and some apprehension among the people that they're commanding, who, probably don't want to bring about Armageddon. I don't.
I would hope so.
I'm not sure only that a small subset of people want there to be Armageddon. And if you're thinking you're actively bringing it about, that might give you some pause, or at least you don't believe you're bringing it about. But if you think your commander is doing something to bring about Armageddon, I kind of erodes trust with that person, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the possibility of a draft, because, the White House has refused, according to the White House spokeswoman, to rule out the possibility of a draft if this war expands. How seriously should Americans take that possibility, and what can they actually do about that? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. The draft, the U.S. got rid of the draft in the Vietnam War because the draft led to, a revolt within the military. I mean, that's the only way to put it. The Pentagon evaluated that our army is in a state of complete collapse, by the early 1970s. The military in a state of complete collapse, large part because of the draft and the social movements and all of that bolstered it. So they've avoided a draft since Vietnam because, the soldiers almost overthrew the Pentagon. But nobody should think that a draft is impossible. In fact, if the U.S. wants to engage in the large-scale wars that it plans to, like China, potentially Iran, and a bigger war in the Middle East, it would have to enact a draft. I mean, in the Iraq War, the only reason they didn't enact a draft in the Iraq War when the troop surge was happening is because they found a loophole, and they called it the backdoor draft. And so it's called stop loss. People who served their contract, I sign up for 4 years, my 4 years is over. You're told you have to stay in for another 2 to 4 years and keep going back to Iraq. And so thousands and thousands of soldiers who were supposed to get out, who signed up for a certain amount of time, tried to get out and were told they couldn't. That is the only reason the U.S. didn't have to enact a draft, to get as much soldiers as they needed to continue the Iraq War. And that's just the Iraq War. And so so we've been close to a draft before, and the soldiers who got stuck in it would say that they were drafted in a backdoor way. And a lot of people don't know this, but starting in December, every single person born a male who is between the ages of 18 and 24 will automatically be registered for the draft. Right now, you have to go online and register yourself for it. If you want to, there's very little control over it. If you want to get certain federal benefits or something, like you have to be registered for the selective service within a certain age range, that's gone. starting in December, if you fall into that demographic, you will be registered for the draft by like some AI corporation that finds you and puts you in the draft. So everyone in that falls in that category will be registered for the draft, and everyone should worry about the draft. Luckily, that's another thing we do at the Center on Conscience and War. You can preemptively register as a conscientious objector. And that's one thing you can do by calling our hotline. The thing is, right now, it's easy to do because you just sign up for selective service, say I'm a CO, fill out an application, send it to us. We'll keep it on file for you for if you are drafted. We have the packet dated from before you were drafted. When it becomes automatic, we're not exactly sure that's how it's going to work yet, but we will have a plan before it's initiated. And so, that's another reason people should keep our number, because, come December, you're going to need to know how to sign up with us.
And for those who are only able to listen to the audio of this, in order to get in touch with Mike's organization, the Center on Conscience and War, you can contact the following phone number. It's 1-800-379-2679. That's 1-800-379-2679. I sound like I'm one of those people on PBS asking for donations.
You're not bad at it. They might get a job offer.
Thank you. I feel like that. Yeah, seriously. I feel like I did a pretty good job of that. And then Mike, finally, as we wrap up here, I wanted to ask you just to kind of go over again, what can soldiers, active duty soldiers, legally do who don't want to participate in this war? What options do they actually have? And what does it actually mean to become a conscientious objector?
Sure. Well, a conscientious objector is someone with a firm, fixed, and sincere belief that does not allow them to participate in war. Since 1970, when it was challenged at the Supreme Court, it was ruled that this does not have to be religious. Traditionally, this was a religious belief. Since 1970, non-religious moral beliefs apply. And so you don't have to be a person of faith. If you are, that is great also. But basically what it means is that you file a packet, some paperwork. You have to answer some questions. That's something that done with a counselor is not hard to do. And then once you submit your conscientious objector packet to your command, before they even investigate it, before they give you a hearing, before they make a decision, as soon as that packet is dropped, your command is obligated to accommodate your beliefs. Meaning that if you have a deployment order coming up, you drop a CO packet, the day after you find out, they are not supposed to deploy you. And if they try to deploy you, we have ways to fight them to make sure that they don't. So that's just one, that's just one option. And it's one that's really effective. I mean, the military typically approves conscientious objector packets when the person is sincere about their moral beliefs. And of course, there's this caveat that you can't be just opposed to a particular war. You have to be opposed to all war. But a lot of times we find that a particular war, it is what the trigger is. It is what the crystallizing moment is that causes people to have those deep explorations of themselves and what they're capable of doing and who they are as a person. And so nobody should be discouraged by the fact that it's the Iran war now that's making me think about these things. For example, during the Gaza war was a trigger for a lot of people who became conscientious objectors because they were thinking about, do I have to directly participate in? Do I have to help fly aircraft that are going to deliver weapons to the Israeli government? And they weren't filing a CO because they were opposed to, I just don't want to participate in this. That was the trigger that made them understand, I can't be a part of any of this. I can't wear this uniform. I cannot have peace as long as I am a part of this military machine. That is what qualifies you as a conscientious objector. And we have counselors that will walk you through that entire process and be there for you every step of the way. There are other avenues for people right now. So if people think they might be a CO or they're not a CO, but they are really not, think that they've made the wrong decision by joining the military and definitely don't want to go to Iran. If you're within your first, and this is what we got suspended for on Twitter, just informing people that if you are within 365, your first year of service, your first 365 days, which is probably 230,000 service members. There's a lot of service members who fall in this category. If you're in your first year, you're considered entry level still, which means that if you begin reporting that you have a failure to adapt, I am not adapting, the military is not for me, I'm not adapting, your commander should initiate something called this entry level discharge, a failure to adapt entry level discharge. And so that is that is I wouldn't say it's a loophole, but that's something that most people are not aware of, right? They're not aware that if you're within your first year, it's a lot easier to get out than it is filing a conscientious objector packet. And, there's other avenues for people to get out. But I will say too, that even if there are no more legal avenues available to you, I mean, there's a lot of people in the Iraq war who went AWOL, right? Because they didn't want to deploy. That's I'm not, that's a valid thing for people to feel like they have to do. And we can support people who have done that as well. And so going AWOL, if you know what you're doing when you are AWOL, like if you know when to turn yourself in and how long you should stay gone and all of that stuff, that's something that if people are in that position, they can call us, and we do that work in conjunction with the GI Rights Hotline, which frequently advises people who are AWOL. And so there's definitely heroic people from the Iraq War, people like Camilo Mejia and Kevin Benderman, people who went to jail, military jail, because they left. They said, I'm not going to war. And there's support for people like that also, but also you don't have to go that far. There's also routes that you can take that, can keep you out of jail, but still there's support for you.
No, and that's also important. And I want to put this number up again. You could, if you're interested in what Mike is talking about, and you want to know more, and especially if you're in the military, you can call 1-800-379-2679. That's 1-800-379-2679 to get more information about how all of this works. And Mike,
if you get out as a CO, that's an honorable discharge. You keep your benefits. And so there's a lot of fear among people of, what if it's going to destroy their life and things like that. If you're approved as a CO, you're honorable discharge. You're just like it's like you serve the rest of your contract.
Okay. That's important to know. And also, I mean, it's just like, don't be a pawn and this insane war for empire that's just destroying an entire region of the world. I mean, I'm speaking to you from that region of the world. Yeah. It's literally on fire. Tehran is literally on fire.
No, look, I mean, filing as a CO is intimidating. Things other people do to get out of going. I mean, those things can be scary. But in my experience, talking to people who have done those things, who have gotten out of CO, people who have gone AWOL, even people who went to jail because they didn't want to go, I think I've heard from every single one of those people that all of that was better than having gone. We want to provide people the best options to be able to do that. But speaking from my own experience, I wish I had never gone to the Iraq War. I wish I knew that these kind of things existed and that I could have done what was right then, rather than having to learn the hard way. And so I would say anyone who's questioning right now should know that that questioning is not going to get any better once you deploy overseas. Yeah. If you're already having misgivings about what's happening, that is not going to be improved by you going overseas, be it in Iran on the ground or in the Middle East and neighboring countries in the Gulf, or staying stateside and supporting that operation in some other way.
Well, Mike Prysner, Executive Director of the Center on Conscience and War, and of course, filmmaker at Empire Files. I want to thank you so much for coming on to break all of this down. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot more conversations very, very soon, because I don't think this war is going anywhere. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. And that was the wonderful Mike Prysner. Well, I just want to, before I get out of here, thank everybody who tuned in. Remind everybody to please smash that like button. Helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News on all social media platforms. Make sure you hit that bell so you can get notifications whenever we have new content posted, such as this show, Dispatches, with me, Rania Khalek. And that, I also wanted to add that we are an independent media outlet. Sorry, guys, this is going to be my spiel. We are an independent media outlet, and we are able to bring you programming like this with people like Mike and Jon and so many other amazing guests, and produce all kinds of journalism in these horrible, horrible times to tell you the truth about what's happening in the world because of support from our audience, from you. So if you are able, please consider going to patreon.com/breakthrough news so we can keep going and growing and bringing you the content that you're seeing right here. Sorry, tongue twister. And that's going to be all for today, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next stream.